Ever since Leo came into my life, things haven't felt quite the same, in the best way possible. I still remember the day I met him like it was yesterday. I was just a teenager, still figuring out who I was and what made me happy, when my parents finally agreed to let me adopt a dog. I'd begged them for months, maybe even years, promising I'd take care of him, feed him, walk him, everything. So when we drove to the animal shelter in our little town of Brookside, my heart felt like it was ready to burst with excitement. There were so many dogs there, each one wagging their tails, each one hopeful. But when I laid eyes on Leo, a lanky, gentle Great Dane puppy with the softest eyes and clumsy paws, I knew instantly he was the one. Something about him just clicked, like we were meant to find each other. From the moment we brought him home, Leo became more than just a pet. He was family. He grew quickly, his once oversized paws fitting his strong, tall frame, but despite his size, he always had this soft, almost careful way about him. He followed me everywhere, whether I was studying, lounging in the backyard, or just daydreaming on the porch. Leo was always there. It didn't take long before I realized he wasn't just by my side physically, but emotionally, too. Every time I was feeling down, stressed, or just plain overwhelmed, it was like Leo knew before I even said a word. He'd rest his head on my lap or nudge me gently, his big brown eyes full of understanding. No words were ever needed. Growing up, life came with its challenges, school pressures, friendships that drifted, the general messiness of figuring out adulthood. But Leo remained this steady, unwavering presence. He was always happy to see me, always excited for the smallest things, a walk in the park, a new toy, or even just lying under the trees together in the afternoon sun. The bond between us wasn't complicated. It was built on simple things: trust, loyalty, companionship. People often say dogs love unconditionally, and that's exactly how Leo has always been. He's taught me patience in a way no one else ever could. When I was learning how to be more responsible, balancing schoolwork and part-time jobs, I always knew I had someone depending on me. Feeding him, making sure he had exercise, taking him to the vet. It all made me feel like I was capable of taking care of someone, even on days when I didn't feel like I could manage much else. But beyond that, Leo taught me to slow down, to notice the small, beautiful moments in life, like how he'd stop and stare up at the birds during our walks, or how he'd close his eyes and enjoy the wind against his face. Watching him made me appreciate things I'd usually overlook. Now, as I look back on all these years with Leo by my side, it's clear how much of an impact he's had on me. He's not just a pet. He's been a source of comfort, stability, and joy. Our connection is built on years of shared moments, quiet ones, playful ones, and everything in between. No matter what life throws at me, I know Leo will always be there with his steady presence and loyal heart. I can still remember the exact day my relationship with Leo began, like it's burned into my memory. It wasn't anything fancy or dramatic, just one of those quiet days that ends up meaning so much more than you realize at the time. I was 14, at that age where everything feels like it's moving too fast, but also not fast enough, where you're stuck between being a kid and trying to figure out what growing up even means. My parents had always been supportive but cautious, and for as long as I could remember, I'd begged them to let me have a dog. Not just any dog. I wanted a big, loyal, soft-eyed companion who'd always be there no matter what. I watched every dog show, read every book, and even saved photos of my favorite breeds on my bedroom wall. But my parents always said the same thing. Having a dog is a big responsibility. You need to be ready. I thought I was ready from the moment I could walk, but convincing them was another story. It took months, maybe years, of pleading, promising I'd take care of everything. I told them I'd feed him, walk him every day, clean up after him, and do all the hard work that came with having a pet. Looking back, I think part of them was just waiting to see if I meant it or if it was just one of those childhood whims that would pass. But I knew it wasn't going away. I had this strong pull in my heart, like something was missing, and I just knew a dog would fill that space. Finally, one spring weekend, after what must have been my 100th conversation about it, they said yes. I couldn't believe it at first. I asked them twice, thinking I misheard. But they smiled and told me that I'd shown them enough responsibility and patience, and they were ready to take me to pick out my dog. I think my heart nearly burst with happiness. That weekend, we drove out to a shelter just outside of Brookside, a little town surrounded by fields and trees. It was quiet, peaceful, and the perfect setting for something special to happen. When we walked in, there were all kinds of dogs, different shapes, sizes, colors. Some barking, some shyly hiding, some bouncing excitedly as we passed by. My parents let me take the lead, knowing I'd have to be the one to feel the connection. I wandered up and down the rows, looking into each pen, smiling at the wagging tails and curious eyes. But nothing really clicked right away. That's when, at the far end of the shelter, I saw him. Leo. He was still a puppy back then, though even as a puppy, you could tell he was going to grow into something big. His coat was this smooth, silvery gray that caught the sunlight, and he had these gentle, thoughtful eyes that seemed too old for his little face. Unlike some of the other dogs, he wasn't barking or jumping around. He was sitting quietly, watching everything with this calm, curious expression, like he was waiting. I stood there for a moment, just looking at him, and he looked right back at me. I can't really explain it, but in that instant, I felt something settle in my chest, a kind of knowing. I kneeled down, reached my hand through the bars, and he walked right over, rested his head gently in my palm, and gave me this soft look, like he'd been waiting for me all along. That was it. I didn't need to look at any other dogs. I knew Leo was the one. My parents came over, asked me if I was sure, maybe thinking I'd want to see more options, but I just nodded. I was absolutely sure. There was something about Leo, something quiet but strong, something that made me feel at ease even though we'd just met. The shelter staff told us he was a Great Dane mix, still growing, but already showing signs of being gentle, smart, and calm. They explained that because of his size, he might need more care, more space, more patience. But none of that fazed me. I was already in love with him. That day, we signed all the papers, gathered up a few supplies, and drove home with Leo in the back seat, his big puppy eyes peeking out the window. He didn't bark or fuss. He just watched the world pass by, occasionally glancing back at me like he was making sure I was still there. I couldn't stop smiling the entire ride home, barely believing that after all that time of wishing and waiting, he was finally mine. The first night was a mix of excitement and nervousness. We set up a little bed for him in the corner of the living room, and I sat beside him, gently petting his soft ears, trying to help him feel comfortable. He seemed a little unsure at first. It was a new house, new people, new smells. But before long, he rested his head on my knee and let out this deep, content sigh. It was like he already trusted me. I stayed up longer than I probably should have, just sitting there beside him, whispering how happy I was that he was here, promising him we'd be best friends forever. Over the next few weeks, we got used to each other. I learned how to read his moods, the way his tail wagged slower when he was calm, the little tilt of his head when he was curious, how he'd lean against me when he wanted affection. He learned the rules of the house pretty quickly. He picked up on commands fast, like he just wanted to make me proud. Every morning, we'd go for a walk around the neighborhood, and every evening, We'd sit together on the porch, him lying by my feet, me watching the sun go down. It wasn't long before I realized how much Leo filled the quiet spaces in my life. Whenever I had a bad day at school or felt like the world was too overwhelming, Leo was there. He never needed to say anything. Just having him close was enough to calm me down. My parents noticed it too, how I seemed more grounded, more at peace. They'd smile whenever they saw me lying on the floor beside him, reading a book or just resting. What surprised me most, though, was how much Leo taught me without even trying. Taking care of him made me more responsible. I had to plan my days around feeding him, walking him, making sure he was healthy and happy. It wasn't always easy, but it never felt like a burden. It felt like he gave me purpose, something bigger than myself to care about. And more than that, he taught me patience, how to slow down, how to be present, how to find joy in the simple things, like a quiet morning walk or the way he'd perk up when he saw me coming through the door. Looking back now, I realized that the day I met Leo wasn't just the day I got a dog. It was the day I gained a best friend, a steady companion who'd stay by my side through all the ups and downs. It was the start of a relationship built on trust, love, and understanding, one that would shape me in ways I couldn't have imagined back then. It was one of those crisp Sunday mornings in Brookside when everything felt just right. The sky was clear, the air smelled fresh, and the whole town seemed to still be stretching awake. Leo and I had this little tradition. Every Sunday, without fail, we'd walk down to the park near our house. It wasn't anything grand, just a quiet green space with winding paths, big trees swaying lazily, and a few benches scattered around. But it was our place, a space where I could breathe, where Leo could run freely, and where the world felt simple. That morning started no differently. Leo had been wagging his tail eagerly from the moment I grabbed his leash. He always knew when it was time. We strolled down the familiar route, his pace light, my hand wrapped comfortably around the leash. The sun was filtering gently through the trees, casting soft patches of light on the path ahead of us. There weren't too many people around yet, just a few joggers, a couple walking hand in hand, and a kid riding a bike past us, ringing his little bell. It felt like one of those peaceful, perfect mornings you wish could last forever. Leo trotted along beside me, occasionally stopping to sniff at a bush or to watch a bird flutter by. I always liked how he noticed the small things, the little details I probably would have walked past without thinking twice. That's one of the things I loved most about him, how present he was in every moment. But then, just as we rounded a bend near the far side of the park, something shifted. Leo froze. I could feel the tension in the leash instantly. His ears perked up, his body alert, his eyes focused intently on something ahead. I followed his gaze and spotted what had caught his attention. Across the open field was another dog, a large golden Great Dane, sleek and graceful, walking alongside a woman I didn't recognize. The dog seemed to shimmer a little under the sunlight, moving with a kind of effortless elegance. I didn't think much of it at first. Dogs notice each other all the time at the park. But something about Leo's reaction threw me off. Normally, he'd perk up, maybe wag his tail, and we'd move along. But this time, it was different. His entire focus was locked on that dog, like the rest of the world had faded away. His tail started wagging wildly, and without warning, he pulled hard on the leash, catching me completely off guard. I stumbled forward a step, tightening my grip, trying to steady myself. "Leo, easy," I called out, but it was like he didn't hear me. His eyes stayed glued to the golden dog, his body leaning forward as if some invisible string was pulling him toward her. I tried to hold firm, but Leo's strength was nothing to joke about. He was so much bigger now, all muscle and energy, and it took everything in me just to keep him from breaking free. For a moment, it felt like I was the only thing standing between him and whatever magnetic force had taken hold of him. I could feel my heart pounding, not from fear exactly, but from the sheer intensity of the moment. I'd never seen him react like that before. I called his name again, louder this time, but still he kept pulling, his focus unshaken. The woman walking the other dog glanced over, clearly aware of the commotion, but she gave me a polite smile and continued on her way, unaware of the chaos happening on my end of the park. It was like Leo had been hit by some kind of spell, mesmerized by this unfamiliar dog. It felt strange to see him like that, so determined, so locked in. Finally, feeling a mix of frustration and worry bubbling up inside me, I dug my heels in and gave the leash one strong tug, calling out, "Leo, stop!" There must have been something sharp in my voice because it snapped him out of it. He paused, his head turning back toward me, his eyes suddenly soft, almost guilty. His ears drooped slightly as if he'd only just realized I was there. For a few seconds, we just stood there, both of us catching our breath. I could see the confusion flickering in his eyes, and it hit me hard, seeing him like that, torn between something he wanted and the familiar comfort of me standing beside him. I knelt down, giving the leash a gentle pull so he'd come closer. He walked back slowly, his tail lowering, the spark that had lit him up moments before now dimmed. I scratched behind his ears, trying to calm both of us down. "Hey, buddy, it's okay," I whispered, though my heart was still racing. I felt this weird ache, almost like sadness, as if something fragile had been disturbed. It wasn't just about another dog in the park. It felt deeper, like realizing for the first time that even the bond we shared wasn't immune to outside forces. The rest of the walk was quiet. Leo stayed close to my side, his pace slower, like he knew I was rattled. I didn't say much, just kept walking, feeling a swirl of emotions I couldn't quite pin down. It's funny how one simple moment can stir up so much. It wasn't jealousy exactly, but something close to it. Like maybe I'd taken for granted that Leo would always be tuned in to me, that nothing else could capture his attention so completely. That night, after we got home, Leo seemed more subdued. He curled up at the foot of my bed like he always did, but there was a heaviness in the air, something unspoken hanging between us. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how strange the day had felt. It wasn't just about the other dog. It was about how quickly things can change, how connections can shift in unexpected ways. I reached down, running my hand gently over Leo's fur. He lifted his head slightly, his eyes meeting mine, soft and loyal as ever. In that quiet moment, I realized that relationships, whether with people or pets, are always evolving. Sometimes, without meaning to, you get reminded that even the strongest bonds aren't static. They're living things that need care, understanding, and a little patience when they get tested. I whispered to Leo, "It's okay, buddy. We're still good." He gave a small wag of his tail, like he understood, like he was saying the same thing back. And as I drifted off to sleep, I told myself not to read too much into it, to trust that the connection we'd built over the years wouldn't be shaken by one strange moment in the park. The days after that strange moment in the park lingered in my mind more than I expected. I thought maybe I was overthinking it, that it was just one of those weird, fleeting things. Dogs get excited, they act on instinct, and then it passes. But for some reason, it didn't pass for me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, like a tiny crack had opened in a door I hadn't noticed before. I kept replaying it in my head, over and over, the way Leo froze, the intensity in his eyes, the way he pulled so hard on the leash like something outside of us had called to him. It was unsettling in a way I couldn't explain, mostly because it didn't feel like something I should be so affected by. But I was. After that day, everything felt a little different, even though on the surface nothing had changed. Leo was still his usual self, gentle and loyal, following me from room to room, resting his head on my lap while I read or watched TV, curling up at the foot of my bed at night. But there was something beneath all that familiarity, something I was feeling that hadn't been there before, or maybe something I hadn't noticed until now. It was like I had become hyper-aware of how close we were, how much space he took up in my life, not just physically, but emotionally too. I started noticing every little thing. The way he'd glance up at me while we walked, the way his tail thumped when I entered a room, the way he'd rest his head against me as if the world outside didn't matter. All those small, everyday moments that had always felt natural suddenly felt charged, like they carried more weight than before. I didn't know what to make of it at first. Part of me brushed it off, telling myself that I was just being silly, maybe still rattled from that morning in the park. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it seemed to sit heavy in my chest, like something unspoken I couldn't quite name. It was confusing. Leo had always been there, always the steady presence in my life, my friend, my protector. But now, for reasons I couldn't fully understand, I felt this tangle of emotions: comfort, affection, dependency, and something else I couldn't quite put into words. I caught myself thinking about him even when we weren't together, wondering if he was thinking about me too in his own way. I'd sit on the porch or lie in bed and feel this strange ache, like I needed him close, like the space between us was something I couldn't bear for too long. It wasn't that I didn't love Leo before. I'd always loved him. But now that love felt layered, complicated, like it had grown roots deeper than I realized. It made me question myself. Why was I feeling this way? Was it just because he'd been such a constant in my life? Because I'd grown so used to leaning on him when everything else felt uncertain? Or was there something more to it? Something about that moment in the park that had shifted how I saw him and how I saw myself. I didn't have any answers, and the not knowing made it harder. I started to notice how I felt nervous when other people talked about Leo casually, like he was just a pet. To me, he wasn't just anything. He was the one who'd been there when friends had come and gone, when days felt long and heavy, when I wasn't sure of who I was. He was the one constant, and somehow that felt bigger than it should. Some evenings, I'd sit with him outside, watching the sun sink behind the trees, and feel this strange mix of gratitude and unease. Gratitude for how deeply connected we were, for the calm he brought into my life. Unease because I couldn't quite tell where that connection stopped and where my need for it started. It's a funny thing when you realize your emotions aren't as simple as you thought. You go through life thinking love and loyalty and friendship fit into neat little boxes, each labeled clearly. But then something happens, something small, unexpected, and suddenly those boxes don't feel like they hold everything. That's how it felt with Leo after that day. Like I'd spent years thinking our relationship was one thing, only to realize it might be something more layered, more tangled. It wasn't a bad feeling exactly, but it was complicated, and it made me feel like I was walking around with this quiet, restless energy, unsure of what to do with it. I tried to shake it off by staying busy, cleaning, organizing, filling my days with little tasks to keep my mind occupied. But even then, I'd catch myself glancing over at Leo, wondering what he was thinking, wondering if he felt it too. The shift, the weight of something unspoken between us. It was like trying to tune out a song that keeps playing faintly in the background. No matter how hard you try to focus on other things, it's still there, lingering. One night, after another long day of pretending everything was normal, I sat down on the living room floor, and Leo came over, resting his head in my lap like he always did. I ran my fingers through his fur, staring at nothing in particular, and felt that familiar ache settle in my chest again. It was soft, not sharp, but it was there. I whispered to him, half hoping he understood. "What are we doing, huh?" Of course he didn't answer. He just closed his eyes and let out a content sigh. But somehow, that simple act felt like an answer all its own. Maybe it didn't need to be named. Maybe it didn't need to be untangled all at once. I realized then that emotions don't always fit into clear lines. Sometimes they overlap, bleed into each other, and what matters most isn't figuring them out right away, but acknowledging that they're there. The love I had for Leo wasn't something I needed to define to know it was real. It could be messy, complicated, layered, and still be something meaningful and safe. That night, I finally let myself breathe. I didn't have all the answers, but I didn't need to. I just knew that whatever was happening inside me, whatever shifts were taking place, Leo was still there, steady and loyal as ever. And maybe, for now, that was enough. The days following that realization were some of the most confusing I'd ever experienced. On the outside, everything looked the same. I'd wake up early, stretch, glance over at Leo already waiting by the door, tail thumping gently. I'd feed him, leash him up, take him for our usual morning walk through Brookside. We'd pass by neighbors, wave hello, watch the same birds fluttering by, smell the same freshly cut grass. But inside me, there was this constant hum, a buzzing tension I couldn't seem to quiet. It was like my thoughts kept looping back to one place, and no matter how hard I tried to focus on something else, chores, errands, even conversations, I'd find myself right back in the middle of it, wondering why everything suddenly felt heavier. I kept asking myself the same questions. Why did I feel so off balance? Why was Leo's behavior that day in the park still sticking with me like a splinter under my skin? Why was I reacting so strongly to something so small? And the more I asked, the more restless I felt, like there wasn't an answer simple enough to soothe me. Every time I looked at Leo, a wave of conflicting emotions would wash over me. Love, confusion, maybe even a little sadness, and I couldn't sort out where one feeling ended and another began. He'd glance up at me with those calm, steady eyes, and I'd smile automatically. But underneath the smile was this knot I didn't know how to untangle. The nights were the worst. It was quiet, just me and Leo, and the creaking of the house settling. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing, replaying every little interaction between us. I'd remember the way he'd leaned into me on the couch earlier, or how he'd glanced back at me during our walk, and suddenly my chest would feel tight, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. I didn't want to feel this unsettled. I wanted to go back to how things were before, simple and easy. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, the unease wouldn't let go. Part of me felt guilty, though I couldn't quite say why. I kept wondering if I was overcomplicating things, if maybe I was leaning too much on Leo emotionally, letting myself blur the lines of where companionship ends and something deeper, messier begins. I felt ashamed even thinking that, because to the outside world, he was just my dog, my sweet, loyal Leo who followed me everywhere and never asked for anything more than love and care. But to me, he had become so much more, and I wasn't sure how to process the intensity of that realization. I stopped talking to my friends about him as much. I used to casually mention little things Leo did, funny quirks, silly moments, but now I found myself holding back, afraid they'd pick up on something I couldn't even fully name. I felt like I was guarding this secret part of myself, a part that felt too vulnerable to share. It was exhausting, honestly, carrying it around while trying to appear like everything was normal. There were days I caught myself being short-tempered, frustrated over the smallest things, snapping at myself for no reason. And then there were days I'd feel completely hollow, like I was just moving through the motions, detached from everything except for Leo's quiet presence beside me. It was like he was the one anchor keeping me tethered, and at the same time, the very reason I felt like I was drifting. Sometimes, when we'd sit outside together, I'd watch him intently, studying every little detail. The way his chest rose and fell as he breathed, the way his ears twitched at every sound, the calm strength in his posture. And I'd feel this ache in my chest that I couldn't explain. It wasn't sadness exactly, but it wasn't peace either. It was something heavier, more tangled. I kept wondering, was this what growing up felt like? Realizing that relationships aren't as straightforward as you thought? That sometimes the people, or pets, you love most stir up the most complicated feelings inside you. I thought about talking to someone, maybe even Evelyn again. She'd always had this way of cutting through the noise in my head and making things feel clearer. But every time I thought about opening up, I stopped myself. How could I put into words something I barely understood? How could I explain this constant undercurrent of unease, this strange heaviness, without sounding foolish or overdramatic? Instead, I kept it all bottled up, carrying it with me like an invisible weight. And the more I tried to ignore it, the heavier it felt. Even Leo seemed to sense it. He'd watch me more closely, tilt his head like he was trying to figure out what was going on inside me. And every time he looked at me like that, it made me want to cry and laugh at the same time. Cry because I felt so confused. Laugh because how could a dog understand so much without saying a single word? The hardest part, I think, was realizing how much I depended on Leo without fully realizing it until now. He wasn't just a pet. He was my safe place, the one constant in a world that often felt like it was shifting beneath my feet. And maybe that's what scared me the most. The thought that maybe I had poured too much of myself into that bond, leaned too hard, and now I didn't know how to stand on my own without feeling unsteady. But through all of it, despite the confusion and guilt and emotional tug-of-war happening inside me, Leo never wavered. He was always there, waiting by the door, following me around, resting his head on my knee like nothing had changed. And I realized that no matter how tangled my emotions got, his loyalty never shifted. That at least was something solid I could hold on to, even when everything else felt uncertain. So I kept going, day by day, trying to navigate the turmoil inside me, hoping that eventually things would settle, that I'd find my footing again, that maybe, just maybe, I'd figure out how to let myself feel everything without being afraid of it. I don't think I ever realized just how exhausting it is to carry something quietly inside you, to keep walking through your days pretending everything feels the same when, deep down, you know it doesn't. After everything that had been stirring inside me, after that moment in the park, after all the restless thoughts at night, I found myself slipping into this strange routine of wearing a mask. On the surface, I acted like nothing had changed, like I was still the same girl walking Leo around Brookside, chatting with neighbors, smiling when people asked how I was doing. But underneath, it felt like there was this quiet tension constantly pulling at me, a weight pressing on my chest that never fully let up. It wasn't like anyone else could see it. In fact, I think I got pretty good at hiding it. That's what made it harder. It's one thing when you're dealing with something loud, something obvious. But when it's all happening inside, when you're the only one who knows how heavy your own heart feels, it starts to feel isolating. Every morning, I'd get up and go through the motions. Feed Leo, take him out for our walk, make breakfast, check my phone, answer messages like everything was fine. And in a way, parts of it still were fine. I mean, nothing on the outside had fallen apart. But inside, there was always this edge, this quiet voice whispering that something was off, something was unsettled. And the more I tried to silence it, the louder it seemed to get. Even with Leo, I kept things light. I smiled, scratched behind his ears, played fetch in the backyard like we always did. But there were moments, little ones, that felt different. Like when he'd curl up beside me on the couch and I'd catch myself staring at him too long, wondering if he felt the same shift I did. Or when I'd lay in bed at night, listening to his steady breathing, feeling like I couldn't quite relax even though he was right there. The hardest part, though, wasn't even the feelings themselves. It was pretending they didn't exist. Because if I acknowledged them, if I let myself really sit with everything, the confusion, the ache, the heaviness, I was scared I wouldn't know how to handle it. So I pushed it down, smiled when I needed to, nodded along in conversations, went about my day like nothing was tugging at me from the inside out. And maybe no one noticed. Maybe they thought I was fine. But every time someone asked how things were going, I felt this flicker of panic, like they could somehow see right through me, like they might ask the one question that would unravel me completely. I avoided deep conversations. Friends would invite me out, suggest we catch up. But I found myself pulling back, making excuses. It wasn't because I didn't want to be around them, I did. But I was afraid if I sat still long enough, if I let myself open up even a little, everything I'd been holding in would spill out. It felt safer to keep moving, to stay busy, to let the routine wrap around me like armor. I think part of me hoped that if I just kept pretending long enough, the tension would eventually fade. That one day I'd wake up and feel like myself again, like the complicated emotions swirling around inside me had been nothing more than a passing storm. But the truth was, the more I bottled it up, the more it simmered beneath the surface. Even with my parents, I noticed myself pulling away. They'd ask how I was doing, and I'd give them the usual answers. Fine, good, busy with this or that. I didn't want to worry them, didn't want them asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. So I smiled, changed the subject, kept the conversation light. It became almost automatic, this way of sidestepping anything too real, too close to what I was feeling. But there were nights when I'd lie awake and wonder if they noticed anyway, if they saw the way my smiles didn't quite reach my eyes, if they heard something in my voice I couldn't hide. And then there was Leo. Always Leo. He was the one constant, the one piece of my life I didn't have to fake around. But even with him, there was this undercurrent of tension I couldn't shake. I'd find myself wondering if he sensed it, if he knew I was holding something back. Dogs have this way of picking up on things, moods, energy, and sometimes I'd catch him watching me, his head tilted just slightly, like he was trying to figure out what was going on inside me. I'd brush it off, pat his head, tell him everything was okay. But deep down, I wondered if he believed me. It's funny how heavy something invisible can feel, how much effort it takes to keep up a facade when your own heart feels like it's weighed down by something you can't even name. I started to feel like I was living in two separate worlds. The one everyone saw, where everything seemed normal, and the one inside my head, where the tension never quite let up. And the longer I went on like that, the more exhausting it became. There were moments when I'd almost let it slip. Little cracks in the mask. Like when Evelyn would text to check in, and I'd stare at the screen for minutes before replying, tempted to spill everything but always holding back. Or when a friend would ask if I was okay, and for a split second, I'd consider saying no, actually, I'm not. But I never did. It felt easier to keep it all hidden, to carry the tension quietly, than to risk being vulnerable. But the truth was, I was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of feeling like I couldn't just be honest, not even with myself. I kept telling myself I'd find the right moment, the right words, the right way to explain it all. But the days kept passing, and the tension kept building, and I kept pushing it further down, hoping it would go away on its own. Still, there were nights when it felt like the walls I'd built around myself were closing in. Nights when I'd sit in the dark, Leo curled up beside me, and feel like I was barely holding it together. And in those moments, I'd wonder how much longer I could keep pretending, how much longer I could carry it all without something breaking. But each morning, I'd get up, take a deep breath, and start the cycle all over again. Smiling, nodding, going through the motions, hoping that maybe tomorrow would feel different, hoping that someday soon I'd find the courage to let the tension go, to stop hiding, to finally let myself breathe again.